I've been a bad boy all my life, and I don't mean that in a good way. Since the third grade at PS 122 in Astoria, Queens, I was known as a problem child, which basically stemmed from being physically and mentally abused at home. I never graduated the sixth grade, but I did leave behind a record of assault, extortion, blackmail, theft, destruction of school property, and sexual deviance. Let me explain the sexual deviance. What I mean by that is when I was in fifth grade, in the back of the school auditorium, all right, I got three girls, Connie, Avita, and Maria. Don't ask me how I did it, but I talked them into playing strip blackjack with me. What they didn't know was that I had set up the deck of cards to win every time. Needless to say, in a very short amount of time, I had all three girls down to their socks and underwear. Okay? So, right before Connie is about to take off her bra, my fifth grade teacher, Mrs. Apt, ABT, I had a crush on her. Mrs. Apt, she walks in on us. She screamed, okay? She told the girls to put on their clothes. She looked at me, then she screamed my name red with fury and told me to report to the principal's office. And mind you, by the fifth grade, I could get to Dr. Jerkinoff's office blindfolded from virtually anywhere in that school, okay? I stabbed the kid with a pencil once. Till this day, he had it coming to him. You know, kids can be cruel, and I got teased a lot. You know, why? Well, poverty is a badge of shame and ridicule. Not that my father didn't have the money. He made a decent living. He had, a wife and, not my mother, and five other kids on the side, you know? Now, as if wearing secondhand Salvation Army clothes and black pleather shoes with holes in them, okay, with holes in the soles, if that wasn't bad enough, you know, me and my brother, we used to, on our way to school, when we went down the stairs of the apartment building, we used to sit down and we used to get the supermarket flyers, and we used to put them in our shoes. And when it rained, which was for some fucking reason, always on gym day, not that that mattered much because we weren't allowed to participate without sneakers on the gym floors. So what that meant is there I am, standing there in these handmade gym shorts and holy black shoes that left a trail of little wet pieces of paper everywhere I walked, You know? They used to call me keyholes, because we had holes in our shoes. They used to say I had holy shoes. Anyway, my father, he had this thing. He would change our food menu every 30 days or so. You know, sometimes three times a day for what seemed to be like a month at a time. It was either jelly and egg sandwiches, fucking disgusting. Which actually, I got to tell you, I don't think I've ever had a sandwich like that again. Jelly and eggs. Liverwurst and Wonder Bread. All right, liverwurst and Wonder Bread. I still can't stand the smell of it, and that fucking oatmeal. Let me tell you something. One day during oatmeal month, me and my brothers were sitting at the table for breakfast, and I just can't do it anymore. I can't eat it. My father says to me, Robert, you are either going to eat that oatmeal or you're going to wear it to school. Needless to say, he dragged my ass 3 blocks to school wearing that fucking oatmeal, and he walked me into my classroom with it. That was not a good day, you know. In a rage once, which was common for me, I threw another kid, Gus, who had it coming to him too, down a flight of stairs. I almost killed that kid. I'm not proud of this. 15 years later, I went back to that school to get some records, and the school guards, they stopped me at the door, and they treated me like I had walked in there with a bomb strapped to my chest. They escorted me in, and they escorted me out, and they told me next time, send an envelope, and till this day, I am still no longer allowed on that school's premises. Same thing with Long Island City High School, by the way. So my father, one day, he just split. He left my mother battered and seriously mentally ill. Straitjacket, mentally ill. My two brothers and me. He left us in a one-bedroom apartment with no electricity, or rather, stolen electricity. No food, no money, and an eviction notice on the front door. My grandfather, a lifelong factory worker, came to our rescue. The only feasible way to stretch the less than $2 an hour that he was earning was to send us to the Dominican Republic, where Grandma lived, in one of the two houses that they owned on a small piece of property. As a kid in the DR, I was known as El Terror, or the Terror. My grandmother, God rest her soul, used to call me in Spanish. She was Dominican. She used to call me Muchacho del Diablo, which means the devil's child or spawn of Satan. Take your pick. you know, I wrote something a few years ago that you could call an abridged version of my autobiography, where you can get more details on that story. I'll tell you where to get it later on. But for now, long story short, all right, American kid already fucked in the head in a foreign country that hates Yankees. Hold on a second. They hated us, man. I didn't know a word of Spanish. I put up with a lot of shit. I got my ass kicked almost daily. I often tell this joke that the way I learned Spanish was these little Dominican kids, kicking the shit out of me and cursing at me in Spanish. You like a puta, Yankee, mamaguel, all that shit. Anyway, I got kicked out of every school they put me in, or just flat out didn't go. I had a severely diabetic grandmother and a mother who was, gone half the time. It is what it is. So that meant that I had no supervision and no one to answer to. A lot of people said that I was just going through a phase, and they were right. All right? Phase one, I started smoking, drinking, stealing, riding motorcycles, and getting laid by the age of 15. I was smoking weed every day, rarely home, and my two best friends were a juvenile delinquent named Edgar and a convict, not an ex convict, an escaped on the run convict named Arimendi. He wore a cast on his leg because he was shot escaping from jail. Okay? Arimendi taught me a lot of things, especially how to hustle and how to steal on a whole new level. All this by age 17. Then I did something. I was out of control. My whole family, my cousins, aunts, uncles, they couldn't handle me anymore. And they figured that if I stayed in the DR, that I would end up either in jail or dead, either of which would have killed my mother and my grandmother. So my godparents, they sent me back to New York to live with my Tia Flower, my grandfather, my older brother Gil, twin, and my mother's aunt. I was told to leave 2 weeks later. So before my 18th birthday, I found myself homeless for the first time on the streets of New York City. Phase two. With my Dominican Republic training in hand, I did what I knew how to do. It didn't take me long to find friends. I slept anywhere I could: shelters, parks, subways, under the staircases of the nastiest apartment buildings you can imagine. I made my living, uh, by the way, not a very good one, um, gambling, stealing, hustling. I was doing drugs on a whole new level. Now it was cocaine, freebasing, and any drug I could get my hands on. Black beauties, Valiums, Quaaludes, mescaline, crack, you name it. Oh yeah, and pretty much having sex with anything that moved. All right. Most New Yorkers, they have a coffee and a buttered roll for breakfast. And listen, 6 months after my 18th birthday, my breakfast was a dime bag two of weed, 5 to 10 shots of Jack Daniels, and at the least a half a gram of coke and a pack of cigarettes. And those were the good old days. Phase three. From ages 19 to 22, life got real. Crazy. Okay? I gotta say, I made some interesting new friends in the 80s. Among them were Colombian drug dealers, several Greek drug dealers, and many Italian drug dealers. Let's just say that they were extremely colorful, religious individuals. In other words, holy shit. Okay? I was really close to one guy. His name was Gus. Not the same Gus. I knew him for almost 2 years, and I had to end our relationship abruptly when I found out he was a fucking undercover DEA agent. My hand to God, he was sent in to befriend me to get to the guys I knew. The night that I found out who he was, I went to pick him up at his apartment to take him to a 5 kilo buy that I had set up. I was going to make 3,000 a key, 15,000 cold hard cash. All right. So here's what happened. I walked into his apartment. Right. He was taking a shower. I had keys to his place. All right. He was taking a shower, and I said, Gus, I'm here. He said, hey, listen, help yourself to a couple of lines, on the dresser. And I'm like, all right, cool. So I go into his bedroom, and there it is, mountain of coke, right? So I'm taking a couple of fucking hits, right? And I see that he's got two wallets on his dresser. And for some reason, man, I had this thought in my head. I said to myself, I need a wallet. He's got two. He probably just bought a new one and he's going to throw one out. Let me find out which one it is and I'll ask him for it, right? So I pick up the wallet. I pick up the first wallet I pick up. I open it. DEA. Let me tell you something, man. I got out of there and I got out of there quick. All right? I ran to the closest phone and I called my people and I told them the heat is on. That was just the code we had, that it was over. If we made that call, it meant, all right, that we had just found out that they were after us in any way, whoever was after us. Anyway, if something or someone hadn't been looking out for me that night, I would have spent almost 15 years behind bars. And when I say almost 15 years behind bars, because the guys that would have gotten pinched that night would have never let that happen. I wasn't going to live 15 days, much less 15 years. Pretty glamorous, right? Before it all came crashing down on me, man, and it did. Most of it was fun. It was. But in the end, every one of those people that I just mentioned, every one of them were looking for me, and they were looking for me. I pissed all of them off at the same time. This phase ended with me sitting on the floor of a dirty motel room on Astoria Boulevard, right across the street from LaGuardia Airport. There I sat for a really long time, crying like a baby and shaking like a leaf. I was out of my mind, terrified. I had never been so scared in my life. I was in a lot of trouble with a lot of bad people. I didn't know if I was going to end up wearing a Colombian necktie or chopped up in pieces in one of Cheese's sanitation trucks. All right. Either by the grace of God or by sheer luck, I was able to skip town alive and free. And while my bad boy days were over, and I said this before, they weren't. Okay. That's not true. By no means was my life smooth sailing from there on out. For more details on that, you can go to badboybuddha.com and click on the About Me tab, and you'll find the autobiography there. I've been told it's quite entertaining. It's pretty funny, and you could read it in about 30 or 40 minutes or so, and I have it on an audio file as well that you can download, about an hour and a half. So moving on. Bad boy, check. Now you know, okay? I gotta tell you, every time I think of my past, it gives me the chills, man, because I got away with a lot of shit. But on a much lighter and much more positive note, if you'll call it that, Buddha. Translation, the enlightened one. There are three reasons why I've taken that name. My education, two, my achievement, three, because of what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and how I'm doing. All right. Why Buddha? Reason number one, my education. Okay. On a formal level, you already know. I graduated the fifth grade. That's it. Later on in life, because I needed it for truck driving school, I got myself a GED. After more than a few miserable years driving a truck over the road, I got a local trucking job moving furniture in New York City. One day, as my body smelled of Bengay, which my mother used to put all over the back of my body, I decided to do something else. I said to myself, I picked up a copy of the Daily News or the New York Post, and I read an ad in the paper that said, quote, make $1 million, no experience, no education needed. End quote. I remember saying these words exactly. Holy shit, that's so me. You know, it was an ad for a stockbroker trainee. I called the 800 number, then I called in sick at my regular job, and I went to the interview the very next day. I met this guy, a paisan named Joey. I should have known right there, that this wasn't going to end well. So he's an ex truck driver, just like me, and he said, and I quote, "Yo, I'm a fucking moron and I can do it." End quote. So he showed me. Then what he did was he showed me his last 3 monthly paychecks. All I remember right now is that one of them was for over $36,000 take home after taxes. That was a Friday. I quit my truck driving job on that day and started at the firm on Monday. Now, doing that job, selling stock, which by the way, I didn't even know what the fuck a stock was, much less how to sell it to strangers over a telephone, right? That that experience was what got me started on my lifelong journey of self-education and self-help. Starting in 1994 and since, I have read and reread hundreds, if not 1,000 books or more on self development, sales, and building relationships. None of them, which, by the way, did anything to help my career in the stock market. But I learned a lot. Most of all, the most important thing that I learned was that I felt better about myself, you know, the more I read, the more I learned. Professionally, though, after 7, almost 8 years trying to make $1 million as a stockbroker, I found myself broke and brokenhearted. You know, I'd gotten in on the wrong end of the business. I got in on what I came to find out was the boiler room end of it. Incidentally, there are several characters, main characters, in the movie that recently came out called The Wolf of Wall Street, that not only did I know them, but I also, in fact, worked for them. And eventually, I figured this much, that after being able to stay out of jail for as long as I had, after everything I'd done in my life, if I didn't quit when I did, that jail is where I would have ended up. As a matter of fact, every brokerage firm I worked for pretty much was shut down by the NASD and the SEC. One of them was raided 2 weeks after I had left. I know personally over 200 people that I worked with and or for that ended up behind bars for what they were doing. You know, at the time, my mother, my mother was back from Dominican Republic. You know, and she was doing she was doing okay, man. I mean, for what it's worth. I mean, and I knew that because she loved me, she loved all of us. If I ended up in the joint, oh man, it would have literally broken her heart or sent her back to the loony bin. And honestly, man, it would have killed her. And I couldn't live with that, man. That's all I thought about. So I did what I knew how to do. I went back into a large car, or a big truck, or a tractor trailer for you four wheelers, you know, and I hit the road. And for the most part, I've been doing that ever since. Now, driving a truck over the road, you have so much time to think, man. And for a really long time, all I thought every day, day after day, was about the 8 years of my life that I wasted pursuing and telling everyone of this dream of becoming a millionaire. At that point, my life was a pit of total fucking depression. But worse than the regret, than the misery, the suffering, and the heartbreak was the desperation and the fear that I experienced that this is how I would spend my life, a fucking failure, and I would never be able to do anything about it. One morning, I remember this as if it was today. I was driving through the Tennessee mountains and I was having a really ugly, yet romantically suicidal conversation with myself. Specifically, I was I imagined what it would be like to drive my truck off that fucking mountain that I was on and into this beautiful foggy sunrise that I was staring at. Then I had another thought. I thought, hmm, what if I drive my truck into a bridge support at top speed with my seatbelt off? The visuals were amazing and very specific down to the last detail of what it would possibly look like. How would I be found? Would it hurt? Would it hurt others in the process? And even worse, what if it didn't work at all? What if I just ended up mangled or a vegetable for the rest of my life? You know? And then in the middle of this conversation, this stupid conversation, I heard the following words. And I remember this because this is extremely significant for you for later on. So listen carefully. I heard these words: Robert, what the fuck is wrong with you? And then again, Robert, what the fuck are you talking about? And immediately having those two thoughts, hearing those two thoughts, all of a sudden, it was like a movie screen. I started thinking about all the things I had been through in my life. And I said to myself these words exactly. I'll never forget them. I said, fuck that shit. I ain't going out that way. This is totally unacceptable. And there is no way I'm doing it. No way. Just like that. That's when, a little more colorful than that, but whatever. That is when I made the decision that because of it, I am here talking to you right now. And that decision was this. I figured that since I would be stuck in the middle, stuck in that truck for God only knows how long and with no end in sight, that I would make the most of it. And I would continue to educate myself and read. It was just like this power. All of a sudden, I felt that if I read as many books as possible, that I would figure it out, whatever that meant. Now, many times in the past, people have asked me, what college did you go to? What university? And I reply with this. I tell them I went to the Freightliner University, sorry, the International University, because Freightliner and International are the makes of the trucks I spent so much time learning about life in. This journey began more than 20 years ago. I listened and I read books on tape, on CD, in the last 4 or 5 years on DVD, digital audio books, and electronic books. But the real changes in my life, the ones that brought me to enlightenment, to where I am now, they didn't really start happening until 5 years ago when I found myself in a serious, life threatening situation. I started looking for answers to the experience I'd had, which we'll talk about later. But for now, what you need to know is that I have spent the better part of the last 5 years, more than that, studying metaphysics, religion, exclusively metaphysics, religion, spirituality, studying about the universe, the laws of intention, the laws of attraction, the art of allowing, etc. I have read and or listened to well over 400 books on those subjects alone. Many, if not the majority of those books, I have read more than once. And in many, many cases, I have read individual books dozens of times over. I really wanted to get the content because they changed my life in such immense ways. I will have a partial list of them on my website soon, and I I intend to continue adding to them for many, many years to come. I'm going to